Okay, so chapter 6 starts with us learning it's been a few weeks since that day when Gatsby's throwing his shirts and Daisy's crying into him. So if we're looking at the timeline of the summer, this would be like mid to late July. But the one thing Nick does know is that Gatsby and Daisy have secretly been seeing each other every day. So for Gatsby, this is obviously a good thing. Maybe Daisy's thinking about being with him. Maybe his dream is about to be achieved. So Nick really thinks that's where this is headed. But one day he comes home from work and there's a reporter from a local newspaper in New York waiting for him. And the guy asks Nick to give some quotes on a story he's doing on Gatsby. And Nick's like, I didn't want to say anything, but of course there's all these rumors of who he is and where his money comes from. And so he's like, I didn't tell the guy anything, but to us, the reader, he's like, I think it's important that you know what I know. Okay, so chapter 6 is a different type of chapter. It kind of goes back and forth to time periods. What Nick's going to do right now is explain to us, the reader, here is what I eventually found out about Gatsby. Okay, so we're going to jump around a little bit here in terms of the time period. Okay, so a quick rundown, and this is in your book, of course, but his real past is different than what Gatsby says. First of all, his name is not even Jay Gatsby. His name is James Gatz, and he changed it, and which we'll get to. He is not from San Francisco. He was from North Dakota. His family was not wealthy. In fact, they're very poor. Okay, so it's like a total 180 from what he said. So he's from North Dakota, very poor, different name. He attended a school called St. Olaf's, and if you look it up, it is a real school in Minnesota. And he went there, very smart kid, but he didn't have enough money for tuition. So he dropped out after 2 weeks, and really at this point, he's 18 years old and has no plan. So he travels to the Great Lakes looking for work, and he comes across probably the turning point of his life is when he met this guy named Dan Cody. And it's a guy we've not heard from. That's an important figure to Gatsby. Okay, so he meets this guy, and as it's described, this Dan Cody guy is a fisherman. Okay, now, I don't know about you guys, but there's not too many fishermen on the Great Lakes in the 1920s who are described as being millionaires. Okay, so if you'd read this back then, you'd get, this guy's not a fisherman. He's probably a bootlegger, taking alcohol between Canada and the United States, but he had a lot of money. Okay, so Gatsby ends up working for this guy, and he was like the #1 influence in his life, like a second father. And Gatsby learns how to act, how to live with money. He learns different connections of people, probably in organized crime. And it seemed like this was kind of the life path for Gatsby. But, as fate would have it, this Dan Cody guy ends up dying. And Gatsby is left, again, with no money and no direction. But, this time, he has this vision of, this is what I want to be like. Okay, so when Dan Cody dies, Gatsby decides to kind of reinvent himself, names himself Jay Gatsby, and decides to join the military. He actually gets stationed in Louisville, which we already know, and that's of course where he meets Daisy Buchanan. Okay, now in chapter 6, there's a little backstory, we'll find out more later, of Daisy's entire family and their wealth and what she comes from. So Gatsby meets her, and of course Daisy has no idea how poor Gatsby is. He acts like he's rich. He doesn't have to wear many clothes because he's an army officer. So they fall in love. Okay, now here's kind of, to me, the more I've read this story, the more important it is to get this section. This is where Gatsby's life really changes. Because of course he wants to be rich and successful. Now he wants to be with this girl. And what's Daisy's family like? They're very wealthy too. Okay, so suddenly his whole vision for his future is being rich and successful, being with this girl, and now they get tied together. And he not only loves Daisy, but he loves what she represents. She represents high class in America, the top status of society. She represents being rich and making it. And so to him, this is like a love story between him and a girl, but also him and the American dream. this poor kid who wants to make it. Okay, and of course, as we know, she eventually ends up marrying Tom Buchanan, and the rest is history. Okay, so the more I've read this book, the more I'm like, it's not just a love story here. It is a story about a guy trying to better himself and become, part of it in America. Okay, so when you read chapter 6, you have to understand that section. It really defines what the book's going to be about here in the end. Okay, so we learn all this backstory about Gatsby, and then we flash back to the actual story. And it's, to me, another important scene. Nick, kind of on a whim, decides to go to Gatsby's house one afternoon. And he shows up, and there are a few people there. There's a husband and wife we have not met yet. They're named Mr. and Mrs. Sloan. But Tom Buchanan shows up too. And Nick is like, it is really weird that Tom would come there. And there's a little context in the story, but there's the sense that Tom is skeptical. He knows Daisy's been leaving. He's maybe heard rumors about Gatsby. Maybe he's even followed her or whatever. So he decides to show up to try to maybe check Gatsby out. And Nick is like, it was a very awkward thing. They have all these characters that kind of know but don't say anything. And it's kind of an assumed conversation, but Mr. and Mrs. Sloan, who are from East Egg, of course, the richer section of town, they invite Gatsby to lunch. And Gatsby, of course, says sure. But at one point, Tom says, "Are you sure?" Almost insinuating like, I don't think you should come with us, like you don't belong with us. You're from West Egg, not East Egg. And I think for the first time, Gatsby gets angry at Tom. You can get the sense like maybe these inadequate feelings from his past show up here when Tom insinuates, you're not good enough for us. And Nick can see it, and Nick can sense it. And there's this tension building between Tom and Gatsby. So Gatsby basically says, okay, you guys can go ahead. And Gatsby stays back at his house with Nick. And Gatsby's a little bit angry. And he says to Nick, I have a perfect plan. Daisy's told me she wants to be with me. I'm going to tell Tom. But he's going to do it in grand fashion. He's going to throw a party. Okay, now mind you, he's not thrown a party since he's been with Daisy. Doesn't have to. But he wants to throw a big party. He's like, I'm going to make it the biggest and the best. I'm going to invite Daisy, and I'm going to be there. And this is like, I put on the board, this is like his full court press. He wants to hammer it home. He's going to be with Daisy. He's going to tell Tom at the party. He's going to make it right, and it's going to be like happily ever after. So the last part of chapter 6 is this big party scene. And of course, there are thousands of people again, celebrities, movie stars, alcohol, food, you name it. And of course, Gatsby's there. And of course, Tom and Daisy show up. So they get out of the car, and one of my favorite subtle jabs of the book, Gatsby starts to introduce Daisy around to different people in the party. And again, he's trying to show off. So here's how he does it. He goes, Daisy Buchanan, how lovely you are. This is so-and-so. And then he introduces Tom as, and this is Tom Buchanan, the polo player. Now, back in the 20s, this would be like the ultimate slap in the face. This would be like saying, this dumb jock. And Tom Buchanan hates it. He's thinking to himself, I'm the richest guy here. Why am I introduced as, the polo player? So at one point, Tom kind of says, I've done an investigation of your past. At least I'm not a bootlegger. And that's like a slap back at Gatsby. So the two of them, the tension's building, and Nick's even like, something's going to happen here. Like they know what the other's up to. So the party's going on, and of course, Daisy and Gatsby get the idea to run off by themselves, and they go to Nick's house, which is of course right next door. So they leave secretly, and they spend the night together at Nick's place. And the party goes on, and Tom can't find Daisy anywhere. And he's getting more and more angry as the night goes on. So finally, it's really late, and Gatsby and Daisy show back up, and Tom is, again, just enraged. grabs Daisy, and they basically get pushed into the car and they leave. And the party breaks up. There's only two people left, and it is Nick and Gatsby. And Gatsby is, again the word, bewildered. He just doesn't seem 100% happy. Nick's like, he seems happy, but not happy at the same time. So finally Nick just says, listen, like, what's wrong? I can sense that you're not happy. And Gatsby goes, I just can't get it exactly like I want. I mean, we get along, Daisy and I, we still have a spark, but it's not perfect. It's not like it used to be. And Nick says an important line. He goes, you can't repeat the past. No matter what you do, time has passed and she has more experience and she has a kid and like circumstances have changed. And Gatsby goes, what do you mean? Of course you can. And at this point in the story, Nick kind of just tells us, the reader, I think this is the first big red flag for me. Like, seems like Gatsby is obsessed. It seems like he can't get past whatever vision he has in his mind. He can't overcome it. And it seems like the phrase is a famous Shakespeare phrase. He has a tragic flaw. I mean, he has everything you want. He has money, he has fame, he has this great house, now he has Daisy, but he just has this one flaw of being obsessed about making it perfect. And what Nick does at the end of chapter 6, he takes us back to another flashback scene to 1917, to one of their first dates, and he shows us as the reader, here's where this obsession and this tragic flaw began. It began the first night that they kissed, when Gatsby and Daisy walked along the sidewalk, and he had to choose. Do I want to be with Daisy, or do I want to be successful? Because you probably can't have both. And he decides, of course, to kiss Daisy. And from that moment on, his mind has almost been poisoned by his obsession for Daisy and what she represents. It's almost like he can't think straight. And to Nick, I mean, we don't know yet, but it seems like this is going down a bad path. It seems like a good person and a good character is almost being tainted by maybe a dream that he can't attain, something that he can't get. And Nick's kind of thinking, maybe this isn't going to end well. Okay, so just like every chapter to this point, there's a cliffhanger here at the end of chapter 6. How's this going to go here? And in the end, I mean, is Daisy going to choose Gatsby? She still hasn't said it for sure. Okay, so there's all these questions still, and not many answers yet. I always tell my classes, if you would take a poll and take 100 literary critics from all different time periods and say what is the most famous chapter in American literature history, a lot of them would probably say chapter 7 of The Great Gatsby. So if you look and you read it, there's going to be a lot we have to talk about. In fact, it probably could be 2 chapters. There's going to be so much. I'm going to have notes all over the place. So it's an important chapter. You'll read it and you'll say, wow, what writing, what a plot, and we'll have a lot to talk about. So chapter 7 is next.